2 years before the girl who would come to be known as Orange, a name now whispered in fear and awe across the unforgiving, rugged lands of the western frontier, was merely a child, innocent and free, unaware of the fate that would soon shape her. In those days, she had no idea of the darkness that loomed just beyond the horizon, no inkling of the trials she would face. For now, the world seemed boundless, full of promise and wonder. Each morning, the sun rose slowly over the hills, spilling golden light onto the earth, while birds called out to one another in joyous greeting. The hills around their home were lush with greenery, and the air smelled of fresh grass and wildflowers that bloomed with unrestrained beauty. The soft wind would whisper through the trees, and the world seemed to hum with life. In the evening, when the sun set behind the distant mountains, the sky would light up in a wash of brilliant purples, pinks, and oranges, painting a canvas that took Orange's breath away. It was a sight she would always remember, those evenings when the sky seemed to speak of something eternal, something beyond their little cabin, beyond her father's stories. Orange, with her dark eyes full of wonder, would gaze at the horizon each day, her heart as unburdened as the wind that swirled around her. Her laughter echoed through the plains like the song of a bird, pure and sweet, and she woke every morning to the sound of her mother's gentle voice humming a lullaby as she worked, and her father's deep, comforting voice as he tended to the fire or worked the land. Life was simple, peaceful, a melody that played without interruption. Orange's world was small, but it was hers, and in that smallness, she felt a sense of completeness. The house they called home, a modest cabin made of weathered wood, stood in harmony with its surroundings. It was not grand, not like the grand mansions of the rich or the bustling towns she had heard of in stories told by travelers who passed through. But it was enough. It was a place of peace, a place where laughter and love filled the air like a quiet symphony. Her father, a dreamer through and through, had taught Orange to see the world not as it was, but as it could be. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was always of grand things, of wild adventures, of mountains so tall they seemed to touch the very heavens, of rivers so vast and powerful they could swallow entire villages. He spoke of deserts where the sand stretched for miles, golden and endless, and valleys so green and fertile that crops grew without care. It was through his stories that Orange came to understand that the world was a vast and untamed place, one that was always changing, always shifting. And though their cabin was a sanctuary, her father made it clear that the world outside was calling, beckoning with a promise of something more. And then, one evening, an evening as soft and fragrant as the earth itself, her father leaned across the wooden table, the firelight dancing in his eyes, and looked at her mother. It was a look that made Orange pause in her play, the warmth of the hearth suddenly feeling colder. Her mother, who had always been so steady and grounded, now had a shadow of doubt in her eyes. Orange noticed the change immediately. Her father, a man of great dreams, had always been the one to speak of the great unknown, but now there was something more in his eyes, something urgent. He had decided to take them all on a journey, one that would take them far from the safety of their home, far from everything they had ever known. "We are going west," her father said, his voice steady, yet laced with a quiet excitement. "To the far side of this land, to the Pacific. We will find a new life, a new home." It wasn't an easy decision, of course. The thought of leaving the peaceful hills, of leaving the life they had built together, weighed heavily on her mother's heart. Her mother, who had lived through enough hardship to last a lifetime, felt a deep unease settle in her chest. The unknown was a cruel thing, a beast that could not be tamed. The road ahead would be long and treacherous, and every mile would bring new dangers. Her mother, whose hands had long been worn from labor, could not help but wonder if their dream would be worth the price they would pay for it. But her father was insistent. His eyes sparkled with the vision of the life he wanted to create, a life away from the chaos that seemed to be creeping steadily closer. A life where they could build something of their own, untouched by the greed and corruption that he had seen begin to take root in the towns and cities of the East. His words were like a sweet melody to Orange's ears. His belief in the West was contagious. He spoke of vast, untouched lands, places where men and women could start anew, free from the chains that held them back. The promise of open skies, of endless horizons, filled the air, and the vision of a better life danced before them like a bright star. And so, after many nights spent around the fire, with the stars above as their only witnesses, they made the decision. They would leave behind the only life they had ever known, the only home Orange had ever had, to seek the promise of a new beginning. They would journey westward, through deserts and mountains, across rivers and plains, toward an uncertain future, but one filled with hope. To help them along the way, they joined a caravan of like-minded settlers, all bound by the same dream of a fresh start. The caravan was a mix of families and individuals, each with their own reasons for leaving their homes and embarking on this treacherous journey. The promise of the West was a powerful thing, and it drew people like moths to a flame. Together, they would face whatever the wilderness had in store for them, their fates intertwined. The caravan would not travel alone, of course. Alongside them, there would be two men, two guides who had earned the trust of the settlers. Bill the Glass Eye, a man with a hardened face and an icy gaze, was as much a part of the wilderness as the land they would traverse. He had seen the worst the world had to offer: savage battles, treacherous bandits, and the deadly forces of nature. But it was his sharp eye, the one that was made of glass, that had kept him alive. The other, Jaime the Cantarino, was a man of contrasting nature. His laughter was infectious, and his tales spun vivid pictures of faraway lands and strange adventures. His voice, rich and smooth, could turn even the most dangerous of situations into something light-hearted. But behind the warmth of his charm lay a quiet strength that had been tested in ways Orange would never truly understand until much later. These two men would guide the caravan, leading them through the wilds and protecting them from the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Bill, with his no-nonsense attitude and piercing gaze, would ensure they stayed on course. Jaime, with his songs and stories, would keep their spirits high. Together, they formed a partnership that seemed, at least for now, unbreakable. For Orange, these men became figures of intrigue and wonder. Bill's silent strength made her feel safe, like nothing could harm her as long as he was near. Jaime's laughter was a balm for her soul, a reminder that the world was still a place of joy, despite its challenges. Together, they were the guardians of her childhood, the ones who kept her world from falling apart. As the days stretched on and the caravan moved westward, Orange's heart filled with a quiet anticipation. She did not fully understand the magnitude of the journey ahead, but she could feel it, the pull of the unknown, the promise of something more, the adventure that awaited just beyond the horizon. The future was still a distant dream, but it was a dream that with every passing day seemed to come closer and closer. The road ahead, though long and uncertain, was theirs to travel. And in the quiet moments when the wind whispered through the trees and the stars glowed above them like distant diamonds, Orange allowed herself to believe that their journey, her family's journey, was just the beginning of something great, something new, something that would forever change their lives. Little did she know, however, that the world she had come to love so deeply would soon be torn from her, replaced by a far darker reality, a reality where survival would become her only song. The day had come, When the caravan set out, its heavy wagons slowly creaking into motion, bound for the west, where a new life awaited. As the wheels turned, rolling over the dusty earth, the sight of their home shrinking into the distance was a bittersweet moment for Orange. Yet there was no time for sorrow. She was a part of something larger now, a caravan of souls embarking on an uncertain journey, led by two men who were more than simple guides. Bill the Glass Eye was a man whose reputation had preceded him. There was no mistaking his presence, not with that eye, his left eye, made of glass, a strange and unsettling thing that glinted unnaturally in the sunlight. The other settlers in the caravan were often reluctant to meet his gaze, not out of fear, but because his unsettling silence carried a weight that was hard to bear. Orange, despite being just a child, had quickly learned to trust Bill. His silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was a kind of stoic presence. His actions spoke louder than words ever could, and when he did speak, it was always in a low, measured tone that demanded attention. She admired Bill's quiet strength. He walked at the front of the caravan, always observing, always vigilant. His movements were deliberate, purposeful, as though every step was calculated, every glance taken with precision. Bill's face was a roadmap of survival. It was a rugged face weathered by time and experience. His skin was rough and weathered from countless battles with the harsh elements of nature, and his broad shoulders carried the weight of a man who had fought through wars, skirmishes, and countless hardships. There was something about him, something that made Orange feel safe, even if she couldn't quite understand why. His presence had a way of reassuring her, of easing the worries she hadn't even known she had. Bill was a protector, not just of the caravan, but of the spirit that held it together. He wasn't a man of many words, but when Orange needed something, whether it was help with a heavy load or a comforting glance, Bill was always there. He had an unspoken way of providing that, something that Orange could never quite put into words. She felt secure in his presence, like a fortress made of silent promises. Then there was Jaime the Cantarino, a man whose laughter seemed to follow him wherever he went. His demeanor was the complete opposite of Bill's, full of lightness and charm. If Bill was the rock, Jaime was the breeze, moving with ease, never heavy, never forceful. His laughter could cut through the longest of days, bringing with it an infectious warmth that made even the hardest of journeys feel lighter. Jaime had a way of speaking that made everything seem like an adventure. His voice, rich and smooth, was the kind that could make even the most mundane task feel like part of an epic tale. Jaime's stories were endless, and each one seemed more extraordinary than the last. He would speak of distant lands, of places Orange had never imagined, bustling cities, far-off mountains with peaks that pierced the sky, and deserts where the sand seemed to stretch forever. He would weave these tales in the evening by the campfire, with his voice rising and falling in rhythm with the crackling flames. The other settlers would gather around, their weary faces softened by the enchantment of Jaime's words. His stories gave them hope, or at the very least, a distraction from the exhausting road ahead. To Orange, Jaime was like a bright star in a dark sky. He made everything feel possible. When the weight of the journey began to wear on the caravan, when the days felt long and the road seemed endless, Jaime was there to lift spirits. He would grab Orange by the waist and swing her around in circles, making her laugh with abandon, her worries disappearing into the night air. She would hold tightly to him, her small hands clutching his shoulders as they spun beneath the stars. His laughter was her comfort, his songs her joy. For a time, it felt like nothing could go wrong as long as Jaime was there. But there was more to Jaime than his endless stories and infectious laughter. There were moments when the light in his eyes would fade, when the weight of something hidden deep inside him would surface, though he never spoke of it. At night, when the others were asleep, Orange would sometimes catch him staring into the fire, his gaze distant, almost haunted. She would never ask him what he was thinking. He didn't offer the answers, and she had learned to respect that. But in those quiet moments, Orange felt an unspoken bond with Jaime, a bond that went beyond the carefree joy he showed. It was the understanding that beneath the surface, there was more to both of them than met the eye. Jaime, too, had a history he had left behind, one that he would never share. But for Orange, that was part of what made him special, his ability to bring light to the darkest places, to offer hope without ever asking for it in return. He was, in many ways, the heart of the caravan, the one who kept spirits high when they faltered, the one who made each day feel like a step closer to the unknown, to the promises of adventure that awaited them on the other side of the mountains. The dynamic between Bill and Jaime created a balance that Orange had come to depend on. Bill, with his silent strength and protective gaze, was the guardian of their safety, watching over them with an unwavering commitment. Jaime, with his easy laughter and charm, was the guardian of their hearts, reminding them that life was not only about survival, but about living. Together, they made the impossible journey seem achievable, the dangerous path seem a little less treacherous. Orange loved them both in different ways. She would often find herself walking beside Bill, her hand clutching his sleeve, her eyes looking up at him with an unspoken trust. He didn't need to speak to offer her comfort. His presence alone was enough. When danger loomed on the horizon or when a storm brewed in the distance, Bill would take his place at the front of the caravan, his keen eye scanning the horizon, always alert, always prepared. Jaime, on the other hand, was the one who made Orange feel like the world was still full of magic. She would seek him out when the journey felt too heavy, when the weight of uncertainty pressed down on her shoulders. Jaime's laughter was her respite, his stories her escape. When he lifted her onto his shoulders, she would forget for a moment that the world could be cruel, and she would simply laugh, her heart light and free. In the beginning, Orange didn't fully understand the significance of their roles, the depth of their protection. She didn't yet know that the road ahead would test all of them in ways they couldn't imagine. But she felt it in her bones, their importance, their need for one another. In a world where danger lurked at every turn, where the Wild West was a place where only the strong survived, the guardians of the caravan were her anchors. They were the ones who would keep her safe, who would lead her through the wilderness and guide her toward a future unknown. As the caravan trudged on through the plains, the days blended together, each one a new chapter in a journey that Orange knew would change her forever. Little did she know, however, that it was not only the landscape that would shift beneath her feet, it was her own fate, tied forever to these two men, these guardians who had taken on the burden of leading them all into the unknown. The days rolled on beneath a sun that painted everything in shades of gold and copper. The caravan creaked and groaned like an old song as it made its slow journey westward. Hooves and wheels carved paths into the wild soil, leaving behind trails of dust that shimmered in the heat. The land seemed to stretch forever, a great breathing beast of rolling hills, whispering grasses, and skies so wide they made you feel like a grain of sand in God's own hand. Orange, still small enough to ride in the back of her family's wagon, spent her days pressed to the canvas flap, watching the world unfold. Her dark eyes lit up each time a new marvel appeared. A herd of wild horses galloping in the distance, hawks circling high overhead, or an old tree bent by time and wind that looked like it had stories of its own. Sometimes she would run barefoot through the high grass at rest stops, laughing with other children, picking flowers, and returning with her hair full of burrs and her hands full of treasures only children could value. Her father kept a journal each night, scribbling notes beneath the flickering light of the campfire. Her mother sang lullabies under her breath as she prepared simple meals over the flame. There was warmth in those nights, in the way families huddled together beneath the stars, in the scent of smoke and sage drifting on the wind. But it was Jaime the Cantarino, who brought true magic to the evenings. With a battered guitar strung across his back and a voice like sun-warmed whiskey, Jaime would sit near the fire each night and sing. He had dozens of tunes, some funny, some tragic, some so old they felt carved out of the rocks themselves. But there was one song he returned to again and again, a haunting lullaby that somehow never lost its hold on Orange's young heart. He sang it low, slow, like the earth itself was listening. From the other side I'm coming, Mama. From the other side of Tucumcari I ride, just to see my lovely woman. For a day too long I've cried. To my lady I shall go. Whistled soft and sad, then sung again. From the other side I'm coming, Mama. From the other side of Tucumcari I ride. Orange never forgot that melody. It settled deep in her bones like a secret, a soft echo she would carry into her darkest days. She would hum it years later with a hand on her rifle and her eyes full of ghosts. Bill, the glass eye, always nearby, but never one for many words, would sit sharpening his knife as Jaime sang, his good eye watching the dark. Though his glass eye never blinked, it seemed to glimmer colder each time the firelight caught it. He said little, but everyone felt safer when he was close. And so the caravan pushed west, their journey marked not only by miles crossed, but by songs, laughter, quiet prayers, and the rhythm of hooves and wheels. To Orange, it was adventure. It was everything her father had promised. But the West does not give without taking. It began subtly, like the first drop of rain before the flood. As they moved farther from towns and deeper into wild territory, the land began to shift. Gone were the gentle hills and flowered meadows. Now the horizon offered jagged ridges, dense forests that whispered too loud at night, and rivers with currents that pulled harder than they should. The air changed too. There was something heavier in it now, something old and waiting. The birds grew quieter, the animals scarcer. Orange, though still too young to name her feelings, began to wake with a strange chill in her spine. One evening, they camped near a river that ran dark and fast. Trees leaned over the banks like silent sentinels. Jaime sat near the fire with his guitar, fingers poised to play, but he didn't. For the first time in weeks, he didn't sing. Orange sat near him, legs crossed, waiting. "Aren't you gonna sing, Jaime?" He looked up, startled, then forced a smile. "Not tonight, little star. The wind ain't right." Bill stood nearby, hand resting on the butt of his revolver. His jaw was clenched tighter than usual. His gaze never stopped scanning the trees. Jaime tried to laugh, tried to chase away the tension, but when he finally strummed his guitar, the chords sounded hollow. Still, he began the song. His voice cracked slightly, the notes less steady than usual. "From the other side I'm coming, Mama. From the other side of Tucumcari I ride." He stopped mid-verse. Everyone in the caravan turned to look at him. Orange reached out, gently touching his coat. "You forgot the words," she whispered. He looked down at her and smiled, but it was a different smile, small, tight, tired. "No, Nina," he said softly. "I didn't forget. I just heard something else." From across the river, a branch snapped. Bill drew his revolver without a word. Men moved quickly to douse the fire. Mothers clutched their children close. Fathers gathered rifles. The world shrank to silence and shadow. Orange didn't fully understand the fear in the air, but she felt it press down on her chest like a weight. She looked at her parents. Her father stood, rifle in hand, eyes hard. Her mother knelt beside her, whispering prayers into her hair. And still, in the back of her mind, that melody echoed, "From the other side I'm coming, Mama." The river did not care about the bloodshed behind her. It did not ask her name, nor did it hesitate, as she stumbled down its rocky bank with tears on her cheeks and screams caught in her throat. The river only roared, loud, cold, indifferent. Its voice drowned out the memory of gunfire and death. like nature itself was trying to wash it away. But Orange was not ready to forget. She was still running, still bleeding, still broken in ways she couldn't yet name. She plunged into the water. It was not a decision. It was instinct. A desperate leap into the unknown. One moment, her boots scraped over moss-slick stones. The next, the current yanked her legs from beneath her and dragged her into the icy dark. The shock of it stole the air from her lungs. The cold was alive, a creature that clawed at her skin, sinking its fingers into her ribs and spine. She flailed, gasping, swallowed river water, choked, went under. Panic surged like fire through her veins, her arms slapping the surface, her small hands grasping at nothing but sky and current and chaos. She surfaced, coughed, screamed for someone, anyone. "Mama!" Her voice cracked. The river answered with a roar. She tried to swim, but the current was merciless. It tossed her like a rag doll, spinning her through jagged channels between rocks, slamming her shoulder against stone, pulling her deeper again, her vision blurred. Her breath was gone. The world turned to foam and shadow, and then darkness. The river took her. Time lost meaning inside that watery tomb. There were only flashes, the burn of her lungs, the scrape of submerged branches across her arms, the echo of her father's last words fading in her mind. And then somehow, the river gave her back. She was flung from its grip like driftwood, her small body tumbling into the shallows along a muddy bank far downstream. She did not rise, not at first. Her chest heaved, water poured from her lips. Her eyes fluttered, but did not open. She was barely 10 years old, and she had just watched the world die. The sky above her was bruised and grey, dusk settled like ash across the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled. A lone buzzard circled. Orange lay half buried in river silt, her skin pale, her hair soaked and tangled with twigs. Her dress was torn, her knee was bleeding. Her left eye was swollen from where a stone had struck her. But she breathed. Slowly, painfully, she sat up. Her bones felt heavier than stone. Every movement sent lightning through her limbs. She coughed, spat more water, then looked around. Nothing. No wagons, no smoke, no voices, just wilderness, wild and empty and wide. She shivered uncontrollably, her lips blue, her teeth chattering. Somewhere inside her, a scream tried to claw its way out, but she swallowed it. There was no one to hear her, no one to come running. The world had gone silent now, like it was holding its breath. And Orange understood, in the marrow of her bones, that she was alone. She crawled to a fallen log and collapsed against it. Her fingers were purple with cold, her breath fogged the air in front of her. She huddled into herself, hugging her knees, eyes vacant. Time passed. She did not know how much. Could have been hours, could have been a lifetime. But when she opened her eyes again, the stars were out, and her shivers had slowed. The wind moved through the trees like ghosts whispering secrets. And that's when she heard it. A sound. Faint. Distant. A guitar, or the memory of one. She didn't know if it was real, if Jaime's song had followed her here, or if it was just her mind clinging to something familiar. But the melody wrapped around her like a thread. From the other side, "I'm coming, Mama." She choked on a sob. She wanted to die in that moment. She wanted to close her eyes and let the cold take her. Let the wolves come. Let the river return for her. She had no family, no fire, no hope. But the song wouldn't let her go. Jaime's voice in her head, warm and steady like a heartbeat, like home. From the other side of Tucumcari I ride. Orange clenched her fists. She looked up at the stars, teeth still chattering, and whispered, "Not yet." She dragged herself upright. Her body screamed, her muscles ached, her soul bled. But she walked. Each step was a declaration. "I'm still here." She walked into the trees, away from the river, toward the unknown. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't care. All she knew was that she was alive. That meant something. The West had taken everything, but it hadn't taken her, not yet. The forest beyond the river was a different kind of wild. Not the cruel openness of the plains or the icy indifference of the water, but something older, darker. The pines towered like ancient gods, their trunks straight as spears, their shadows long and deep. Every branch whispered secrets in a tongue older than man, and every gust of wind carried the scent of sap, moss, and secrets. Orange wandered into it, with numb limbs and fire in her heart. Her feet were raw, her clothes clinging to her like a second skin of ice. But she moved forward, driven not by reason or direction, but by a will that had survived everything the world had thrown at her. A thread, thin and frayed, still pulled her forward. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was madness. But she followed it into the trees, where even the moonlight dared not reach. And then she saw him. He was crouched by a dying fire, tucked in the hollow beneath a fallen cedar. He did not look up as she stumbled into view. At first, she thought he might be a spirit, tall, silent, wrapped in shadow and smoke. But the flicker of the flames revealed dark eyes that watched without fear, a face carved by time and pain, and the unmistakable glint of recognition. He had been there, in the chaos, in the ambush. She had seen him chained, bound at the rear of the caravan, an enemy, they'd called him, a savage, a prisoner. But now he was free, and he was watching her. Orange froze. She had no strength left to run, no courage left to fight. Her legs trembled, her vision blurred, but the man did not move. Instead, he broke the silence with a voice like cracked stone and mountain thunder. "You survived." She nodded, or maybe she just swayed. "You're the girl," he said, almost to himself. "The one who ran." "I didn't mean to," she whispered. I didn't know what else to do." His eyes studied her, not with judgment, but with a kind of grim understanding. "No one knows what to do when death comes." He paused, then added, "Except run or kill." Orange stepped closer to the fire. She didn't ask for permission. Her body moved like it remembered warmth, like it knew the danger was less terrifying than the cold. He did not stop her. He gestured to a blanket, old, frayed, but dry. She collapsed beside it without a word, teeth chattering. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer. Names felt like something that belonged to a past life, a time of dinners and songs, of mothers brushing hair and fathers pointing at stars. But he waited. "Orange," she finally muttered, like it hurt to say. The man grunted. "Strange name." "It's what my mama called me," she said, defensive. "Then it's a good name." He said nothing more for a long time. The fire crackled between them, small and struggling but stubborn. Like her. Eventually she found the words. "They killed my parents." "I know," he replied. Silence. Then, "Were you with the bandits?" Her voice was brittle but steady. His jaw tightened. He stared into the flames, and for a moment he looked like a shadow of a man rather than the man himself. "No," he said. "I was their prisoner. They were transporting me, selling me. When the others attacked, they didn't care who died." She studied him. His wrists still bore the red lines of iron shackles. His skin was painted with scars and symbols she didn't understand. But in his eyes, she saw no malice, only sorrow. "What's your name?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, softly, he said, "They called me White Hawk, but I don't use that name anymore. Not since they caged me." She nodded slowly. "What should I call you?" He looked at her, really looked, and the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Call me what you like. But if you want to live, you'll need to learn fast." Orange stiffened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, tossing another branch onto the fire. "The men who attacked the caravan, they weren't just raiders, they were hunters. and they don't leave survivors. Her breath caught. He continued, "If they think someone got away, they'll come looking. And they know this land, every rock, every trail. Then we should run." He shook his head. "There's nowhere to run out here. Only places to hide, and ways to fight." Orange looked down at her scraped hands, at the bruises and blood. "I don't know how to fight." "You will," he said calmly, "or you'll die." And in that moment, something inside her shifted. The girl who had run into the river, who had begged the wind for her mama, who had wept in the mud, was still there. But she was changing. Like the fire, she was small, but burning. She met the man's gaze. "Then teach me." 2 years had passed since the river carried her away from the world she had known and buried the child named Orange beneath cold water, bruises and silence. Time, as it often does in the West, did not heal her wounds. It only taught her how to hide them. In those first weeks, she'd lived like a shadow, a wandering wraith with bare feet and wild eyes, scrounging roots from the dirt and drinking from streams, her skin darkened by the sun and her spirit hardened by grief. The world was vast, cruel, and indifferent. But she survived, not because she was strong, but because she refused to die. Hunger clawed at her belly, solitude echoed in her ears, and still she moved forward 1 foot after the other, like a creature of instinct and memory alone. Eventually she reached a crossroads in the desert, a cracked, sun-baked junction where trails met like veins in the hand of fate. It was there, staring at the signpost half swallowed by dust and time, that she chose to disappear. Not simply to hide, but to transform, to cast away everything soft and innocent that had once clung to her like a second skin. She chose to become someone else. Orange died beneath the dust and wind. Red was born. She cut her hair with a rusty knife beside a shallow creek, watching the red-gold strands fall like fire into the water. There was no ceremony, no words, just steel against hair and a pair of shaking hands that steadied only when the last lock was gone. She wrapped her chest with old cloth, torn from a scavenged petticoat, bound herself into a smaller, leaner form, and stole a shirt from a clothesline while its owner lay snoring in the shade. Her new name came from a horse she once saw, chestnut red and wild as hell, eyes like burning coals. Red. It sounded simple, blunt, and easy to forget. No one would go looking for a dead girl named Orange if they thought she'd drowned. No one would find her in the face of a dusty boy with haunted eyes. She arrived in Calico Ridge with nothing but the clothes on her back and a hunger that ran deeper than her stomach. The town was a skeleton of wood and rust, forgotten by time and prosperity. But it had a post station, a halfway house for mail coaches and freight wagons bound for bigger places. The station master, Crowley, was an old buzzard with a gut like a beer barrel and one eye as white as bone. He looked at Red for a long time, chewing the corner of his lip before saying, "You clean stalls?" Red nodded. She hadn't spoken aloud in days. Her voice came out low and rough like gravel under boot. "Yeah, I clean." And just like that, she had a place to sleep. Hay in the loft, meals when there were scraps, work from sunup to nightfall, cleaning horse dung and loading crates and leading wagons to the corral. Nobody asked where she came from. Nobody cared. And that suited her just fine. She kept to herself. She spoke only when spoken to, learned to spit like the men, to scowl with her eyes instead of her lips. She studied how men walked, hips forward, shoulders back, and mimicked it until her own footsteps matched theirs. She never smiled. She never sang. Except sometimes, when the moon was high and everyone else was asleep, she would whisper an old tune. Jaime's song, the one he used to hum when the world was whole. "From the other side I come, mother. From the other side of Tucumcari I come, to see my lovely lady. Such a long, long day I've known, but to my love I'll go." She would whistle it just beneath her breath, letting the melody wrap around her like a memory. The song reminded her that there had been joy once, that she hadn't always been alone, that there was once a home, a brother, a world worth remembering. There were travelers who came through the station, dusty and tired, always eager for gossip. Red listened more than she spoke. She learned the names of outlaws, the towns that had burned, the men who had vanished into the gulch. And every now and then, a name would make her heart freeze. Blackwater, Tucumcari, bandits in masks, a caravan left bleeding in the dust. She remembered every word, every whispered clue, every ghost of a name that might one day lead her back to the men who had ruined everything. She kept a notebook hidden beneath a floorboard in the loft. Nothing fancy, just scraps of old paper stitched together with horsehair and spit. In it, she didn't write feelings or dreams. She wrote facts, places, names, warnings, a map of vengeance traced in ink and silence. To survive, I became a ghost, but ghosts don't forget. She was saving every spare coin from Crowley's table, every silver tossed from a grateful coachman, for boots, for a weapon, for a horse. She sharpened knives in secret, watched how the men loaded rifles. She practiced with sticks in the canyon behind the station, carving targets into the redstone walls. She hunted rabbits and learned how to gut them clean. Her hands grew calloused, her eyes colder, because she wasn't going to stay a ghost forever. One day the mask would come off. One day, the girl named Orange would rise from the ashes of the West. And when she did, she would make the devils who ruined her life burn. With their names in her notebook and their faces etched into memory, she would hunt them. Not for justice, not for law, but for something older, something blood-deep and bone-true, vengeance. And the West, dry and brutal as it was, would finally remember the name of a girl it had tried to forget. 2 winters later, the past rides at dusk. The wind had teeth in that season. It bit through the boards of the post station and howled like a beast wounded in the hills. Red, no longer Orange, had grown into the silence. Her voice had become gravel, her walk deliberate. She had learned the rhythm of survival, rise before the sun, feed the horses, haul the water, and stay invisible. She kept her hair short, tucked beneath a battered cap, her face streaked with dust and her eyes always lowered. To the others, she was just another orphan boy looking for work in the wild stretches of nowhere. But every night, in the loft above the stables, she would press the locket to her chest, her last relic, and remember the face of her father as he fell. She would hear the scream her mother made as she was torn from her side. She would remember the cold grip of the river, the mercy of the current, and the silence that followed. In the dark, she allowed herself to become a girl again. But by morning, she was red. And that morning had started like any other, until he came. Just before dusk, as the sun dipped low and turned the dirt into gold, a lone rider appeared on the trail. He didn't gallop in like the braggarts or come hunched with weariness like the drifters. He moved slow, precise, as if the world moved around him. His horse was midnight black, nostrils flared with fire. The stranger wore a worn duster, sun-faded and scorched at the hem, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was shadowed, but his presence made the stable boys stop talking. Even the horses turned their ears. Red was elbow deep in a feed barrel when the man stopped in front of her. "You the stable hand?" he asked. His voice was deep, like boots on gravel, like the sound before thunder breaks. She stood, wiping her hands. "Yeah." He tossed her the reins of his horse. "He's tired. Rode hard. Treat him like your kin." She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the weapon slung across his back. A long rifle, black as obsidian, its barrel engraved with strange symbols. She had seen many guns, never one like that. The man stepped aside, sat by the fire pit near the main cabin, and didn't speak again. All night he remained there, quiet as a stone, feeding the flames and polishing the raven black rifle with a care that felt like ritual. Red couldn't sleep. The man's presence scratched at something in her, something long buried under years of silence and labor. From the hayloft, she watched him below. He stared into the fire as if looking into the past. Once he began to hum, a low, mournful melody that echoed the lullabies of her childhood. Then he took something from his coat, a coin. He flipped it once, stared at it, and whispered a name. Silas, her father. She sat up, heart-pounding, straw in her hair. At dawn, she found him still seated by the dying fire. "Where you headed?" she asked, trying to sound casual. The man looked up. His eyes were sharp, wolf eyes, steel blue. "Where the trail leads, where the ghosts still ride." She swallowed hard. "You ever heard of a place near Tucumcari? A caravan that was attacked, maybe 2 years ago?" The man stared at her. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat and pulled out the coin. It was silver, battered, one side etched with a sunburst, the other bearing the mark her father used to carve into his letters, the family crest. "I found this beside a man who died well," the stranger said. "Buried him proper. Never knew his name until now." Red's voice was barely a whisper. "Silas." The man nodded. "I was too far to stop what happened. But I saw, and I swore to find those who ordered it." The wind gusted through the yard, kicking up dirt. Red clutched the coin like it might burn her. "You were there," she said. "You saw them?" He stood slowly, adjusting the rifle across his back. "I saw masks, black scarves. One wore a snake buckle, another a red sash. Riders for hire, but they weren't thieves. They were looking for something, or someone." The world tilted beneath her. "Why tell me this?" she asked. He studied her a moment. "Because you ain't Red, not really. And if you are who I think, you've got unfinished business too." He turned toward his horse. "When you're ready, follow the raven." She watched him ride into the morning mist, leaving only hoofprints and a silence that rang louder than gunfire. For the first time in 2 years, she cried. But it wasn't just grief. It was purpose. The past had found her, and this time she wasn't running. Where the dust remembers blood, 2 winters had passed since the river carried away her childhood. 2 winters since Orange died, and Red was born. Now that name, once a mask of survival, was beginning to fray. After the stranger rode off, Red stood motionless in the dust for what felt like hours. The silver coin he had left in her hand pulsed with a heat not its own. She stared at it, turning it over with shaking fingers. One side, the sunburst, a symbol her father once carved into the handle of his rifle. The other, the crest, faded but unmistakable, her family's mark. She hadn't seen that emblem since the night of the ambush, when blood drowned her world. The realization hit her like a fist to the chest. Someone out there had been watching. Someone had followed her path in silence, waiting. And now, they had chosen to act, not with a bullet or a warning, but with a memory. That night, Red didn't sleep. She sat alone in the loft above the stable, eyes open, breath shallow, her body still but her mind ablaze. She replayed the stranger's words again and again. "Your father died for something, and you weren't supposed to live." She understood now. The massacre wasn't random, it had been commissioned, a message, or an execution. She had been spared only because she wasn't found. That changed everything. By dawn, her decision was made. She left no note, no farewell, just a folded blanket and an empty stall. With the stables still cloaked in pre-dawn fog, she saddled an old Mustang and rode out before the town even stirred. She didn't look back. The road west was vast and wild. Her days were marked by heat and dust, by silence and wind, her nights by stars and memories. She followed old trails long swallowed by grass, navigating by instinct and the whispers of her father's stories. Each town she passed through offered fragments, shards of a shattered truth. In a cracked saloon mirror in Los Cuervos, she saw a man's hand tattooed with the same sunburst emblem. He left before she could question him. In a border town near the Rio Bravo, an old barmaid spoke of riders in dusters who never stayed the night, who never drank, and paid in coins too old for circulation. In a graveyard outside Del Cielo, she found a name carved in stone, Delilah, her mother's name. Below it, slain in the fire, 1869. But her mother had never been buried there. Red knew that. It was a lie, a planted marker. Someone was covering tracks. She wasn't alone on the road. Now and then, Red would spot signs, subtle but deliberate. A boot print too fresh in the sand, a crow feather tied to a branch, a whisper in the wind that didn't match the rhythm of the desert. She sensed the stranger's presence like a shadow cast behind her own. Not threatening, not chasing, watching, guiding, waiting.
In the wastelands east of Mesilla, she came across a group of settlers whose wagon had been ransacked by bandits. They were huddled beneath makeshift tents, barely surviving. Red shared what little she had, dried meat, water, a bullet for protection. And that night, beside the fire, a blind boy named Elias spoke. "They came in silence," he whispered. "Didn't take supplies, didn't ask questions, just names. When my father gave his, they shot him." Red leaned forward. "Did they say anything?" Elias nodded. "One word, like a name, Delilah." The flames cracked. The name twisted in the air like smoke. Her mother's name, spoken by killers. Not a coincidence, a target. Red stood slowly, a storm behind her eyes. Whoever they weren't ordinary bandits. They were hunters, purging something. A family, a legacy, her legacy. The next morning, Red didn't ride south. She turned north toward the ruins of the old wagon trail, toward the very place where it had all begun. Not to mourn, to remember, to investigate, to burn the lies away. She reached the pass by sundown. The rocks still bore the charred marks of gunpowder. Bones of a broken cart lay splintered in the dust like the ribs of a forgotten beast. Here, her world had ended, and perhaps here it would begin again. Kneeling by a pile of stones, she unearthed what she had once buried in desperation. Her father's knife, rusted and dulled by time. She ran her fingers over the initials carved into the hilt, J.A. John Ashford. She remembered the stories he used to tell, about a town called Whitestone, far north, where the Ashford line had been nobility in another lifetime. A place of white churches, deep mines, and darker secrets. A place where everything might have started. She packed the knife, tied her braid tighter, etched a name into the leather of her saddlebag with its edge. Vance, the man the whispers pointed to. A bounty hunter turned mercenary, a phantom in red sashes. She didn't know if he pulled the trigger that killed her father, but she knew he was part of it, and she was going to find him. As the sun dipped behind the peaks, Red mounted the Mustang, eyes hard with purpose. She was no longer a girl running from her past. She was a storm riding into it. And before this was over, the name Red would mean something far greater than survival. It would mean justice. It would mean vengeance. There are places where the dead speak louder than the living. The journey to Whitestone was long and cruel. Red rode alone, cloaked in dust and silence, through lands that had forgotten the taste of rain. Plains of cracked earth stretched for miles, broken only by jagged hills and the skeletons of trees twisted by the wind. The sun, a relentless overseer, bled through the haze above, and the wind hissed secrets through the brittle grass. Her horse, wiry and stubborn, pressed on with the same iron will that she carried in her bones. Each night, Red camped beneath the stars with only the fire and her nightmares for company. She dreamt not of safety, but of screams,
of smoke curling through air thick with blood, and of faces half remembered, their mouths open in silent warning. In her dreams, a figure emerged from the haze, tall, faceless, with a burning mark on his chest. Each time she reached for her gun, the dream dissolved and she woke gasping, drenched in sweat. 2 years had passed since the massacre, 2 years of survival, of silence, of hiding. But vengeance was not something you buried. It was something you sharpened. And Red had spent every moment sharpening hers. She arrived in Whitestone as the moon rose behind the mountains. The town was a skeleton of its former self. What had once been a bustling mining colony now stood in eerie decay. Storefronts were shuttered, churches were boarded up. A bell tower leaned like a drunken sentry. The streets, once filled with laughter and footsteps, now echoed only the crunch of her boots. The few souls who remained were shadows, slipping into alleyways at the sight of her. Across doorways and windows, someone had scrawled a single word in white chalk: silence. Red dismounted and tied her horse outside the saloon, though calling it that was generous. Inside, the air was stale with dust and rot. A few patrons hunched over their drinks like ghosts refusing to leave. As she stepped through the threshold, a hush fell over the room. Conversations died. The piano player froze, his fingers hovering mid-note. She sat at the bar, said nothing. The barkeep stared, wiped the same spot on the counter over and over. Eventually, an old man with milky eyes shuffled over. His face was a roadmap of scars. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "This town's been cursed since the ash fell." Red's voice was low, measured. "I'm looking for a man. Wears a red sash. Vance." The name hit the room like a thunderclap. Chairs scraped, eyes turned away. The pianist stood and left. Even the barkeep vanished to the back. The old man's lips trembled. "That name brings fire, girl, and fire brings the marked men." That night, Red paid the old man in silver and whiskey for stories long buried. And what he told her changed everything. Years ago, a group of war veterans turned bounty hunters had splintered from the law. Hardened by the battlefield and betrayed by politics, they formed something new, something darker. They called themselves the Marked. They branded themselves literally with searing iron, symbols forged in ancient fire. Each symbol carried meaning, a creed, loyalty, silence, death. They hunted not for gold, but for erasure. They eliminated people, entire families, entire histories. Records vanished, graves unmarked. Their motto was whispered like a plague: no past, no face, no mercy. Red listened, still as stone. The more the old man spoke, the clearer it became. Her father hadn't been a merchant. He had been a hunted man. He had once worked in the mines beneath Whitestone. Something had happened. Something that led him to flee, to hide, to change names. And now she was standing on the ruins of his secret. The mine beneath the town wasn't just for silver. It had once been a war prison, a labyrinth of darkness. Deep underground, a traitor had once been held, one who knew something the government had buried. He escaped. Years later, the Marked came back. The town paid the price. Red lit a lantern and made her way to the mouth of the mine just before dawn. The shaft yawned open like the jaws of hell. Cold air poured out, smelling of sulfur and thyme. She descended alone, the lantern casting long shadows across the stone. The walls were covered in markings, burnt sigils and symbols etched into the rock, circles, eyes, chains. Every few feet, a symbol repeated, a tree engulfed in flame. Then she reached the chamber, a cavern hollowed out of black rock, where the walls bled moisture and silence reigned. In its center stood an altar, crude, blood-stained, ancient. Behind it, brands lined the wall like hunting trophies. One of them bore her family's sigil, the Ashford crest. Her breath caught in her throat. She reached out, hand trembling, and pulled the iron brand from its hook. It was still faintly warm. That was when she heard it. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoing through the tunnels. She spun, pistol raised, but saw nothing. Only the dark, only the silence. She held her breath for a long time. Then, on the wall behind the altar, she noticed fresh carving, burned into the stone with flame. Nos sumus ignis, nos sumus l'oblio. We are fire, we are oblivion. Red emerged from the mine at sunrise. Her coat was torn, her hands were bleeding, but her eyes burned with something new. Resolve. She knew the names now, the symbols, the network. The marked were real, and they had made one mistake. They left her alive. The storm had passed, but in its wake, it left behind a silence far deeper than the thunder that had roared across the plains. The kind of silence that made the crows restless and the cattle quiet. The kind that settled in a person's bones and whispered that change was coming. The prairie stretched for miles, the earth still glistening with rain. Wagon tracks were half swallowed in mud, and the distant hills wore mist like veils. Red stood outside the relay station with a shovel in her hands, clearing debris and fallen branches. Her hair, cut short and tucked under her cap, was damp with sweat and rain, and the ache in her back told her the day would be long. But the silence, that was the loudest thing. The day had stretched into a quiet, muted afternoon as she worked her way through the tasks that filled the endless hours. There was a comforting monotony to it all. The rhythm of work was her shield against the past, against the ghosts that hovered on the edges of her consciousness. But it was that silence, the unnatural stillness that hung in the air, that made her uneasy. It was almost as though the earth itself was holding its breath. The usual sounds of the prairie, rustling winds, chirping birds, the occasional moo of cattle, were conspicuously absent. Even the insects seemed to have retreated into hiding. The land was waiting for something, or perhaps someone. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the field, Red's eyes flicked to the horizon, where the sky had begun to darken. The storm had passed, but its remnants lingered like a faint chill in the air. The wind shifted, carrying with it a scent that was both familiar and unsettling. Dust, sweat, and something else. Something dangerous. It was that evening, just as the lanterns were being lit and the last of the travelers were bedding down in the bunkhouse, that they arrived. 5 riders, each cloaked in dust and dusk. Their horses moved in silence, hooves muffled by the wet soil, and their eyes were shadows beneath their hats. They said nothing as they dismounted. No greetings, no smiles, just nods and coins tossed on the counter without a word. Red watched them from the corner of the station, her heart suddenly heavy in her chest. Something about them unsettled her. She could smell the gunpowder on them, feel the tension they carried like invisible chains. They weren't just passing through. They were hunting for something, or someone. One of them caught her attention instantly, not because he was the largest nor the most armed, but because of the way he moved. Calm, cold, purposeful. A man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He wore a faded duster with an old insignia stitched on the inside panel. A red, jagged circle, half faded by time and travel. Red's breath caught in her throat. She had seen that mark before, years ago, burned into the side of a wagon near the ruins of a ravaged caravan on the edge of the desert. Her father had gone pale when he saw it. "That's the red circle," he had whispered, his voice filled with dread. "If they're near, you ride the other way. Fast." Now they were here. Red's eyes tracked them carefully, one by one, as they scattered to the corners of the compound. Each rider took up his position as though this was part of some larger plan. There was no banter, no idle chatter. The only sound was the rustle of their leather coats and the occasional crackle of the fire. Their movements were deliberate, as though they were waiting for something, or someone. Red did her best to stay invisible, sweeping the steps, tending the fire, feeding the horses. But her ears were sharp, trained by 2 years of survival to catch more than people thought she could. She overheard fragments of their conversation near the stables. "Too clean, too quiet," said one with a broken nose and long rifle. His voice was low, cautious. "We're close, we have to be." Another added, his voice raspy like he smoked firewood. There was a tension in his voice that suggested desperation. Then came the voice of the man with the silver revolver, the one who had looked at her earlier. His voice was calm, like he had seen it all before. "We've been following Ash and Blood for months. She was here. Maybe not now, but she was." A pause. "Or someone like her." Red froze. Her heart pounded beneath her vest. The words were like a blade pressed gently against her skin. Had they found her? Or were they chasing someone else? Her mind raced, the old fear creeping in again, the fear she had buried beneath the surface. Could it really be her? The past she had been running from, was it finally catching up to her? That night she didn't sleep. She sat in the hayloft with a knife hidden under her blanket, her eyes never leaving the men by the fire. The man with the silver revolver didn't sleep either. He cleaned his weapon slowly, methodically, as if it were a ritual. His eyes glinted under the flicker of the flames. She could feel his gaze sometimes, sharp and knowing, as if he could see her even when she was hidden in the darkness. The silence between them stretched thin, taut like a wire, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Red knew killers when she saw them. But these men, they were more than that. They were hunters, not of game, not even of men. They hunted stories, ghosts, myths, and perhaps now, they were hunting her. By morning they were gone, just like that. No farewells, no trail, as if they had never been there. The stable boys swore their horses had no names, and the coins they'd paid with bore foreign mint marks. But Red knew they had left her something, a warning. In the dirt near the well, someone had etched a symbol, the red circle, scratched crudely with a knife. Inside it, an arrow pointing west, where she had come from, where her life had ended, and maybe where her reckoning still waited. That evening, Red sat on the roof of the station, watching the sun bleed into the horizon. Her fingers trembled around her tin cup, and her heart was a battleground of fear and fury. She had spent 2 years hiding, blending, surviving, but the past was moving. It had picked up her scent, and if the red circle was walking the earth again, then perhaps it was time she stopped running. Beneath her mask, Orange stirred. She remembered the song, Jaime's song. His voice rising on the wind as the caravan rolled across the open lands. "From the other side I come, mother. From the other side of Tucumcari I come to see my beautiful woman." And in her mind, it echoed differently now, not as a lullaby, but as a war cry. Jaime's voice had been a lifeline once, a soft whisper of hope in the desert's vast silence. But now the song sounded darker, harder. It spoke of battles fought and won, of choices made that couldn't be undone. "From the other side I come, mother." The wind tugged at her hair, and for the first time in years, she felt her hands tighten into fists. The fire of the past was stirring again, and with it, a fierce determination she hadn't known she had left. She had been running long enough. She had tried to bury her identity, tried to outrun the shadows that clung to her past. But no more. Red knew it was time to face what she had been running from. The red circle was no myth. They were real, and they were coming for her. The shadows on the horizon grew longer, stretching out across the prairie. Red stood, her eyes fixed on the distance, her breath steady. She was done hiding. "From the other side I come, mother." The war was about to begin, and Red was ready. The sun hung low in the sky, its fiery glow casting a golden hue across the endless stretch of desert. The heat of the day still lingered in the air, but the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of the earth with it. Red's horse trotted steadily beneath her, the rhythmic pounding of hooves the only sound breaking the silence of the vast landscape. It had been days since the last town, and the open desert felt like an endless ocean, barren and unforgiving. The landscape stretched on in all directions, empty, desolate and unrelenting. The land seemed to go on forever, an inhospitable sea of sand and scrub brush. A few crows circled overhead, their dark forms like ink blots against the pale blue sky, and every so often the wind would whip up a small dust devil, making the desert look as though it were alive. Red's eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of her hat, scanned the horizon. Her heart had been racing ever since that night. The red circle. The very name sent a chill down her spine, and now every flicker of movement in the desert, every shadow that passed over the dunes, felt like a threat. She had never been one to feel fear easily, but this time was different. This time, there was something lurking behind every rock, every ridge, watching her from the distance. Something patient, something relentless. She adjusted her grip on the reins, her fingers numb from the heat. The past few days had been a blur, riding, stopping only to rest for a few hours in the cold desert nights, always moving. She had learned to silence the thoughts that came unbidden, the memories of her father's face, the screams of her mother, the burning wagon that had once held the remnants of her life. She had learned to shut down the part of her heart that still ached for the family she had lost. She had learned that survival was more important than anything else. And yet, every step she took deeper into this desert felt like a step back into the darkness she had spent so long trying to escape. She had told herself over and over that it didn't matter, that she was stronger now, that she was no longer that scared girl who had run away from the wreckage of her life. But now, as she looked out over the barren landscape, she couldn't shake the feeling that the past was closing in on her, just as the red circle had. The storm that had passed a few days ago still hung in the air. The rain had soaked the earth, leaving it slick and damp, but the sun had returned, and with it, the oppressive heat. The wind was still, though the distant howls of coyotes could be heard in the far distance. It was as if the world had momentarily quieted, holding its breath, waiting for something. And then, in the stillness of the evening, she had heard it, a whisper, like the brush of wind against her skin. She had turned quickly, but there was nothing. The desert was empty as it had always been. But still, the feeling of being watched lingered. Red shook her head, clearing the thoughts from her mind. She couldn't afford to be weak, not now. She had survived this long by not looking back, by not letting the past hold her down. But every step she took felt like it led her closer to a reckoning she wasn't sure she could escape. The red circle was out there, and they were searching for her. She didn't know if they were after her for something she had done, or if it was simply because she had crossed their path. But the truth was, she didn't care. She couldn't afford to care. She had learned long ago that when you ran, you didn't look back. The desert night fell quickly, the sun dipping beneath the horizon and leaving behind a sky streaked with purples and oranges. Red's eyes were heavy, but she fought to keep herself alert. She couldn't afford to rest for long. The fear was real, but it wasn't fear of the unknown. It was the fear of what she had left behind, of the things that would eventually catch up to her. And no matter how far she rode, she knew they would catch her eventually. Her father's words came back to her in a whisper. "You can't outrun them, Red. The past always comes for you." She had tried. She had run for years, jumping from one town to the next, always keeping her head down, always staying in the shadows. But there was nowhere left to hide. The desert was endless, but it was also a prison. There were no cities to flee to, no friends to trust, no safe places to hide. It was just the desert and the red circle. For a moment, Red just stood there, breathing heavily, her revolver still smoking in her hand. The silence that followed was deafening. The red circle was no more. The game was over. But as she stood there, looking down at the man who had caused her so much pain, Red realized something. The battle may have been won, but the cost had been high. Too high. Hunter stepped forward, his hand resting on her shoulder. He didn't need to say anything. He didn't need to ask if she was okay. They both knew the truth. This was a victory, yes, but it was a hollow one. It had cost them both too much. The fight was over, but the scars remained. Red turned away from the man's lifeless body, her gaze lifting to the horizon. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft light over the ruined fort. It was a new day, a new beginning. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the past would always be with her. That the red circle in some form would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike again. But for now, she was free. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe it. The horizon was painted in soft hues of orange and pink as the first rays of the morning sun kissed the earth, casting long shadows across the battered landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind the remnants of the battle, the echoes of gunfire now fading into the distance like whispers in the wind. But the world had changed, and so had Red. She walked, her boots kicking up the dirt as she made her way down the old, crumbling path that led away from the fort. Her thoughts were a tangled mess, memories of the fight flashing in her mind, moments of adrenaline, of death, of finality. She had done it. She had faced the red circle and ended their reign of terror. But now, there was only silence. A silence that seemed to reverberate through her soul, deep and haunting. It was as though the world was waiting for her to break it, to fill the empty space with something, anything. But what was there to say? Her hand tightened around the grip of her revolver, the weight of it familiar, yet strangely hollow now. She had always carried it as a reminder of the past, of the woman she had been, the survivor who had learned to navigate the shadows of the world. But now, with the red circle gone, what was left for her to fight? Who was she without her enemies, without the war that had defined her existence for so long? Hunter was at her side, his presence a steadying force, though she knew he too carried the weight of what had just happened. They walked in silence, the sound of their footsteps the only thing breaking the stillness. He had been there from the beginning, had fought beside her through every trial, every hardship. But now, it was over. The battle had been won, but at what cost? Her mind drifted back to the man she had faced in the final moments, the one who had orchestrated it all, the one who had always been a step ahead, pulling the strings from the shadows. He was dead now, his body lying at her feet, a symbol of the past that had haunted her for so long. She had wanted to kill him, to make him pay for everything he had done to her, to the people she had loved. But when it was over, there was no satisfaction, no sense of triumph. There was only emptiness. For a long while, Red walked without speaking, her gaze fixed on the ground in front of her. The wind carried the scent of earth and dust, and she could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. She had been fighting for so long, chasing vengeance, hoping that one day it would bring her peace. But now that the fight was over, she realized that vengeance was never the answer. It had only consumed her, shaped her into something she no longer recognized. Hunter spoke then, his voice quiet but firm. "Are you okay?" Red didn't answer immediately. She couldn't find the words. Instead, she took a deep breath, inhaling the cool morning air. The smell of the earth, the fresh scent of rain on the wind. It was all so unfamiliar, so different from the blood and dust that had surrounded her for so long. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what's next." Hunter nodded, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You don't have to know right now. We've come a long way, Red. You've come a long way. The past, it doesn't have to define you anymore." For a moment, Red wanted to argue. She wanted to say that she would always be defined by the choices she had made, the blood she had spilled. But deep down, she knew he was right. The past could not define her anymore. She had chosen her own path, and it was up to her to decide where that path would lead. They continued walking, leaving the fort behind them, its ruins now just another part of the landscape. The land stretched out before them, vast and untamed. There was nothing left to fear, no enemies to fight. It was just them now, just Red and Hunter, two survivors walking away from a world they had known, towards something unknown, something new. As the day began to unfold before them, Red couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was small, fragile, like a spark in the darkness, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her, a future that wasn't defined by the past, by the violence, by the war. Maybe there was a chance for her to build something new, something different. But it wouldn't be easy. There would be days when the past would come knocking, when the weight of everything she had done would feel like too much to bear. But she would face those days, just as she had faced everything else. She would survive. They reached the edge of the land, the rolling hills stretching out before them, the sky above a canvas of blue. It was a peaceful scene, one that seemed at odds with everything Red had known. But it was beautiful too. And in that moment she realized that this was what she had been fighting for all along. Not just survival, but peace. A life free from the shadows, from the chains of her past. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Red turned to Hunter, her expression softening for the first time in what felt like forever. "Thank you," she said quietly. Hunter met her gaze, his eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to thank me. I've always been here. I always will be." For the first time in years, Red allowed herself to believe him. She had fought so long on her own, believing that she could only rely on herself. But now, with the red circle behind her, she realized that she didn't have to carry the weight alone. She had people who cared for her, people who would stand by her no matter what. And maybe that was enough. They stood there for a while, the world unfolding before them. The wind had picked up again, but this time it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a promise of something new, something better. Red didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time she wasn't afraid. Together, they walked into the unknown. And as they did, the sun rose higher, casting its light on the land, on the woman who had fought so hard to survive, and on the man who had stood by her side through it all. It was the beginning of something new, and for the first time, Red was ready to embrace it.